Continetti of the AEI, the American Enterprise Institute. Good morning, Matthew. How are you?
I'm well, Hugh. Thanks for having me.
I pay you the ultimate compliment for a pundit. I think you have the ability to fairly summarize both sides of an argument, no matter which side you are on. And so I don't know which side you are on concerning the constitutionality of the proceedings in the Senate. How would you summarize the argument between people who think it is constitutional and those who do not?
Well, I'd summarize it this way. I think it's a good thing for constitutionalists that both sides of this argument are basing their reading on the text and also on the constitutional history. I think the people who say the trial is unconstitutional simply look at the words on the page and they say that those words suggest that only a sitting president can be impeached. On the other side of the argument, there are people who point to history, who point to that fact that there have been impeachments of officials after they have left office. And they raise a couple of other points. They say that if you can't impeach or convict an official after he's left office, then really there's no accountability because as soon as the official has done wrong, he could quit. And then the other argument they raise is that former President Trump, was impeached while he was still in office. And it's just the trial that is happening after he left. And that is just because the Senate refused to come back into regular session after the events of January 6th. So that's how I would summarize both sides.
And Matthew, from a conservative's point of view, how do you rank the authority figures on both sides? Who do you think impresses the members of the Republican caucus for their arguments both for and against constitutionality?
Well, I think Hugh, just based on the vote uh, that they conducted at the beginning of the trial, it's clear that most Republican senators believe that this trial is unconstitutional, which suggests that ultimately former President Trump will be acquitted. I do think that some of the legal authorities who have come out and said that the trial is constitutional are rather impressive. You're speaking about figures like Chuck Cooper, about Michael McConnell. These are serious originalists. And look, I think there are originalists on both sides of the question. People like John Yoo, for example, says that it is not constitutional. But on the one hand, I'm cheered that originalism is having this debate. On the other hand, I think we know on which side the senators have decided, even if there are plenty of authorities who disagree with the Republicans.
And you named the leading two pro impeachment constitutionality authorities among the originalists, and you also noted one of the pro two. But the ultimate for me is Judge Luttig, who himself was the runner up for the Chief Justice of the United States election when George W. Bush nominated his friend and my friend, Chief Justice Roberts. They were one and two on the list. And so when I look to Judge Luttig in the Post, I am persuaded. Now, let me ask you for your personal opinion. You did what I appreciate about you, Matt. You absolutely correctly summarized the argument on the conservative side. Which one do you find persuasive? I don't know.
I do believe the trial is constitutional, Hugh, and I believe that for both on the my reading of the text of the Constitution, of the history surrounding post-impeachment trials, and also the fact that former President Trump was impeached when he was still president, and it was just kind of this procedural um, decision on the basis of the Senate that has led to his trial being conducted after he's left office.
So the one piece of evidence you didn't mention, which I think is most important to me, and I don't think it's constitutional, I never have. Uh, there are two actually. One is that in the aftermath of heinous crimes like Aaron Burr's murder of Alexander Hamilton and his treason trial, he was never impeached. Or when Richard Nixon resigned and reached 23% of popularity and he was pardoned by Gerald Ford so that he would not be criminally prosecuted, he was not impeached. That goes to sort of the state of the mind of the country prior. I am aware of the Blunt and the other one, the Secretary of War. But the other more important thing, Matt, and I just like your reaction to this. At the time of the framing, the very smart people that gathered in Philadelphia did so for 4 months in Pennsylvania, and the Pennsylvania state constitution explicitly provided for the impeachment of officials post tenure. as did other constitutions at the time. These smart gentlemen, they were all men, of course, in that time, were very aware of every state constitution and drew liberally from all of their provisions. Why would they not have included an explicit post tenure impeachment and trial authority had they intended to do so, given the precision with which the drafting committee worked?
I think that's a fair point, Hugh. And I also think that if someone were to try to impeach former President Trump now, after he's left office for a different fact basis, I would agree with you that that would be unconstitutional. He's no longer an official.
Oh, I see.
This
So you're in a
it,
very rare camp. You're in the camp
he
that
was
says
impeached when he was president
so
for
the
actions
trial gets in
for
under that.
actions during
Okay.
his time in office, and that's why at the time I wrote that the trial should have been conducted immediately after the impeachment. But that was not the case for various reasons, and so we've arrived at this unusual place where we are.
Now, let's go for a moment and say that they had had enough time to get to the impeachment. If Nancy Pelosi had sent it over on the next day, what would be the best argument in favor of conviction? I know what I think, but I'd like to hear what you think first.
I think the best argument for conviction is the totality of former President Trump's actions and rhetoric from the election night, basically, to the events of January 6th. Now, I think the impeachment managers made a mistake in their brief, Hugh, when they said that President Trump is singularly responsible for the events of January 6th. Obviously, that's not the case because the mob conducted the actual physical attack. However, if you look at what Trump did since the election was called for November 7th up until January 6th, he avoided multiple opportunities to take an off ramp from his claims that the election had been stolen from him and that he had actually won the election in a landslide. And up until the vote of the Electoral College in December of last year, that was a moment where he could have said, "I fought the fight. I think there's fraud, but I'm standing down, and my supporters should stand down." He did the
That's
opposite.
persuasive, Matt. But last night, Ed Whalen, in a remarkably brilliant tweet that was so good because it was actually effective in 240 characters or less, noted that the president was completely derelict in his duty to stop an attack on the Constitution and the Republic during the hours after he spoke. That even if you would include up to and including arguing on the day, as Democrats have done in the past, against electors being ratified, they did so in '04, they did so in '16, they did so in '00, that immediately upon the recognition of violence, he ought to have both dispatched any and all arms and taken to Twitter and taken to television to call it off. And that dereliction of duty argument was, to me, I thought Ed made a great point last night. What do you make about that?
I think that's also a great point. If you just continue the chronology up until after the riot was pacified or ended, it's absolutely the case. I think some of the evidence that was presented at the trial yesterday, with the timeline that the trial managers presented, with the video of Officer Goodman, in my view, saving Mitt Romney's life by telling him, buying Senator Romney the time to run in the other direction. The video of Vice President Pence and his family being evacuated. All of these images are disturbing, and they also raise the question of what former President Trump was doing at the time. And as Ed Whalen
And
points
Matthew,
out, mhm,
we're low on time, so I want to make sure I get this question in. Chuck Todd and I discussed it yesterday on NBC, and you often are on Meet the Press, as I am with Chuck. And we have a fundamental disagreement that I don't think the media is doing the country a good service by failing to present the arguments against this trial in the way it's proceeding. The number one, which victims ought never to be jurors, and observers on the scene ought not to be analysts because they are emotionally involved in that. Do you think that's gone, commented on? I don't even know how a juror sits in this right now.
yeah, and I think you can look at some of the Republicans and see how that even they are disturbed by what they're doing. Unfortunately, when the trial was taking place at the scene of the crime and the mob targeted the elected officials of the United States while they were performing their constitutional duty, there's no way, I think, of getting out of that situation here.
There is a motion of censure would have done so, or a decision to allow prosecution for incitement to the D.C. authorities, which would be constitutional. There were alternatives to what is, I think, a damaging process. Matt Continetti, always good to see you on Meet the Press. Always good to have you on the Hugh Hewitt Show. Thank you. I'll be right back, America. Stay tuned.